Keanu Reeves walked into the company lobby quietly, almost like a shadow slipping past the morning sunlight. There was nothing flashy about him. No suit, no tie, no polished shoes. Just a worn leather jacket, faded jeans, and old sneakers that had clearly seen better days. His hair, slightly tousled, gave off the impression that he hadn't spent much time in front of a mirror that morning. The receptionist looked up briefly, her eyes scanning the figure before her without a flicker of recognition. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone polite but detached. "No," Keanu replied, his voice calm, unassuming, almost like he didn't expect an answer to matter. She tilted her head toward the hallway. "You'll have to wait there," she said, gesturing at a row of chairs that had been empty for hours. Keanu nodded once, quietly, and walked to the chairs. He sat down. He didn't fidget. He didn't check his phone. He didn't glance around to see who was watching. He just sat, calm and composed, as if he had all the time in the world. What no one realized in that moment was shocking. This wasn't just any visitor. This wasn't a man who needed permission to enter. This was the co-founder and majority owner of the company, a man who held 53% of the company's shares. Every contract, every decision, every corner office, it was his. And yet here he was, being asked to wait like a stranger, like someone unimportant, like someone invisible. People passed by without so much as a glance. Executives in crisp suits walked past, chatting on their phones, laughing at inside jokes, completely unaware that the man sitting quietly in their lobby was the very person who had built the empire they now worked in. Keanu's eyes didn't betray anger. They didn't flash with impatience. They simply watched, observed, noticing every glance, every whisper, every subtle expression of indifference. And then the thought struck anyone watching closely enough. What if this happened to you? To walk into a place you own, to have your authority and presence ignored, to be judged purely by the clothes on your back rather than the person you truly are? Because in that lobby, something profound was unfolding. A lesson in arrogance, a lesson in respect, and a truth about human nature that would shock everyone soon enough. Most people inside that building had no idea who Keanu Reeves really was. To them, he was just another visitor, a quiet man in worn clothes, blending into the background like any other stranger walking into their corporate world. But the truth was far different. Keanu wasn't just anyone. He was the co-founder of the company, a man whose decisions shaped the future of everyone inside. More than that, he was the majority shareholder, holding 53% ownership, more than half of everything around them. Every contract signed, every policy implemented, every corner office filled with leather chairs and polished desks, it all belonged to him. For years, Keanu had stayed away from the office. Not out of fear or indifference but by design. Emails, phone calls, reports, he managed it all without ever stepping into the building. Executives grew used to his absence, to the idea that he was distant, untouchable, maybe even irrelevant. They had no reason to see him and he had no reason to be seen. That morning though he came unannounced. No fanfare. No entourage. No warning. Just a man quietly walking into a lobby that had grown complacent. A lobby that had learned to judge on appearances rather than substance. Keanu didn't come to show power. He didn't come to flaunt authority. He didn't want recognition. What he wanted was simple but profound, to see the truth. To see how people acted when they thought they were safe in their assumptions, when they thought their actions had no consequences. From the corner of the lobby he could see it all. The executives moving quickly through their routines, the receptionist typing on her keyboard, the assistants carrying folders, barely noticing him. Everyone was acting as though the room belonged to them, as though their status made them untouchable. And in a way it did, because none of them knew who they were ignoring. Keanu observed the subtle details. The glance of dismissal from a junior manager, the smirk of someone who assumed they were clever for ignoring a stranger, the whispered jokes that didn't include him but assumed he wouldn't hear. It was all there and it told a story. A story about arrogance. A story about entitlement. A story about people who measure worth by appearances instead of character. It wasn't personal. Not yet. But in those moments, Keanu was learning something even more important than what the building contained. He was learning how people treat those they believe have no power. And that is a truth that is rarely spoken aloud but universally understood. In offices, in schools, in everyday life, the way we treat someone invisible says more about us than it does about them. Keanu could feel the atmosphere of the office. The confidence, the laughter, the self-importance. It was almost tangible, like a fog surrounding the people who thought they were untouchable. Yet he remained calm, patient, almost invisible himself. He didn't react. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched. And as he sat there, quietly waiting, he knew something critical. The next few moments would reveal who these people really were. Some would continue in arrogance, blinded by assumptions. Others would falter, revealing fear, insecurity, or respect too long withheld. This was more than a company visit. It was a test. Not for him but for them. And the results, he thought quietly, would be more telling than any financial report, more revealing than any email chain, more impactful than any board meeting. Lightbulb, have you ever noticed how people treat you when they think you're unimportant? Because in that lobby, under fluorescent lights and behind polished desks, Keanu was about to uncover something that no number, no graph, no shareholder meeting could ever show: the true nature of human arrogance. Keanu sat quietly in the lobby, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes scanning the room without judgment. He didn't fidget. He didn't sigh. He didn't make a sound. Yet everything happening around him told a story he had been waiting to see. Executives walked past him as if he weren't there. One glanced at his worn leather jacket, noted the scuffed sneakers, and looked away, smirking to themselves. Another laughed loudly on the phone, their voice carrying across the hallway, oblivious to the quiet presence just a few feet away. They were so focused on their routines, on their own sense of importance, that they didn't notice the person who actually owned the empire they were sitting in. Behind the glass walls of the boardroom, the energy was even more revealing. Laughter bounced off the polished floors. Whiskey glasses clinked. Expensive watches glinted in the sunlight streaming through the windows. The people inside were completely absorbed in their own world, confident that their status shielded them from scrutiny. Keanu remained seated, almost invisible, watching every detail. 7 minutes passed. Not one person approached him. Not one asked if he needed water. Not one offered a chair closer to the front. No one greeted him. No one acknowledged his presence. It wasn't anger or frustration in the room, it was disrespect, pure and simple. They judged him entirely by appearances: the worn jacket, the faded sneakers, the lack of a briefcase or phone in hand. To them, he was just another man waiting, someone unimportant, someone invisible. And yet the irony was thick. The man they ignored, laughed at, and assumed powerless over, was the very person who held more than half of their company in his hands. Every decision they made, every plan they thought was safe behind their closed doors, was vulnerable to him. And here he sat, calm, patient, unassuming, a quiet storm in their midst. Keanu could see more than just their ignorance. He could see the arrogance, the entitlement, the sense of superiority that comes from being surrounded by power and wealth, but forgetting that power is conditional, fragile, and easily misplaced. He saw how people behave when they think they are untouchable, and he was taking mental notes. Every glance, every whispered word, every laugh carried meaning. He noticed the subtle attempts to assert authority, the way one executive straightened their tie when walking past him, or how another cleared their throat loudly, as if to remind the room that he wasn't welcome. But these small gestures were meaningless. They were gestures born of fear and misunderstanding, not true confidence. Keanu's presence was a mirror. It reflected their arrogance, their assumptions, their inability to see beyond appearances. It was a test of character, and they were failing spectacularly. And for anyone watching this quietly unfold, it would be impossible not to feel the tension. The silence. The unspoken judgment. The invisible power of the man sitting there, ignored yet omnipresent. Lightbulb, has this ever happened to you? Being judged just by what you wear, or how you look, or the assumptions people make about your status? Because in that lobby, Keanu wasn't just waiting. He was revealing a truth that no boardroom, no spreadsheet, and no corporate policy could ever capture. True character is not shown by titles or appearances. It's revealed by how people treat those they think have no power. 7 minutes. Silence. Judgment. Arrogance. And soon, the moment would come when the truth would hit them like a thunderclap. After 7 minutes of silence in the lobby, Keanu Reeves finally stood. He moved with calm, deliberate steps, each one measured and purposeful. There was no urgency in his walk. No anger. No threat. Just a quiet authority that seemed to ripple through the air as he approached the boardroom. Inside, the executives were still caught in their world of arrogance and distraction. Glasses of whiskey glinted in the sunlight. Laughter bounced off the polished walls. Expensive watches caught reflections like small, cold stars. They were comfortable, confident, completely unaware of the storm approaching them. Keanu reached the door and pushed it open. The sound was soft, almost polite, yet it cut through the noise of the room like a blade. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Some mouths opened, then closed. Some tried to mask surprise with indifference, but it didn't work. The moment had arrived. "What are you doing here?" one executive snapped, his voice sharp and defensive, betraying the panic he tried to hide. Keanu didn't answer. He didn't need to. Words would have been unnecessary. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. The kind of card that held authority quietly without fanfare. He placed it carefully on the conference table, directly in the center, as if to anchor the room with its significance. The room went silent. Dead silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Laughter evaporated. The confident postures of men and women straightened, then slumped under the weight of realization. Faces changed instantly. Smiles disappeared. Jaws tightened. Eyes darted around, trying to read someone else's reaction. But there was no one to read. The truth was staring at them. The man they had ignored, the man they judged by his clothes, the man they assumed powerless over, was in fact their superior, the owner of the very empire they occupied. Whispers started. Is that? No, it can't be. He owns this? But Keanu didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence itself spoke louder than words. Each person in that room felt it in their bones, the invisible weight of arrogance being confronted by quiet power. They realized that for minutes, they had dismissed someone whose decisions controlled their livelihoods. Their assumptions had blinded them, and now the consequences were unavoidable. Keanu took a slow breath and scanned the room. Every detail mattered. The smirk that had faded from one executive's face, the nervous tapping of fingers on the table, the subtle shifting of eyes that could no longer hold eye contact. This wasn't about punishment yet. It was about awareness. A lesson they hadn't thought they'd need. Then, almost imperceptibly, he raised his head slightly and let the weight of presence fill the room. A subtle but undeniable force, commanding respect without shouting, without threatening, without moving faster than he needed to. In that moment, everyone understood the truth. This was not a man to underestimate. Not a man to judge. Not a man to ignore. Some executives tried to regain composure. They cleared throats, adjusted jackets, and attempted weak smiles. But Keanu's silence was sharper than any words they could muster. The contrast between his calm and their nervous energy was glaring. And then the whispers grew louder. Files shuffled. Phones unlocked. Secret conversations halted mid-word. It was clear that the room, filled with people confident in their authority, was now facing someone whose authority they had never acknowledged, and never truly respected until now. For the first time that morning they felt small. Vulnerable. Exposed. The arrogance that had carried them through years of meetings, deals, and daily operations had evaporated. They had assumed invisibility was safe. They had assumed casual disregard was harmless. And now all assumptions were shattered. Keanu's calm authority filled the room like a quiet storm. The room had finally understood something they could not unsee. Their judgment of him had been their own undoing. And as he waited, silent but commanding, it was clear. This was only the beginning. What followed would be far more than a lesson in respect. It would be a revelation about the true nature of power, humility, and character. Lightbulb, they finally understood that appearances are often deceiving, and arrogance always gets exposed. The silence in the boardroom was heavy, almost suffocating. Keanu Reeves stood quietly, eyes scanning every face, calm yet impossibly commanding. For minutes no one dared speak. The executives who had just been so confident now felt as though the floor had shifted beneath them. They had been blindsided, not by confrontation but by truth. Then, almost as if on cue, the door opened again. An employee stepped in, hands trembling, clutching a stack of folders. His voice shook so violently that the words barely left his mouth. They were planning to sell the company, he stammered. The room froze. Glasses of whiskey rattled slightly on the polished table as every eye turned toward him. Secret deals, the employee continued, his gaze flickering nervously toward Keanu. Hidden transfers, hundreds of jobs at risk. The executives' confident facades crumbled instantly. What had seemed like secure positions, strategic decisions, and clever maneuvering was now exposed as a web of deceit and arrogance. They hadn't just misjudged a man sitting quietly in the lobby, they had been plotting against the very company he built, the people who depended on it, and the livelihoods of those around them. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. But the calm in his eyes was sharper than any accusation. It was as if the truth itself had manifested in the room, and he was simply allowing it to unfold. Every whispered plan, every hidden deal, every attempt to undermine the company had been revealed by a single employee who dared to speak. And now, all the arrogance, all the entitlement, all the smugness that had filled the room, evaporated. The executives looked around desperately, seeking support from one another, but there was none. They realized that the power they thought they wielded was fragile, conditional, and entirely dependent on Keanu's ignorance of their schemes. An ignorance they now understood had a cost. Some tried to defend themselves. "It wasn't like that," one said, voice wavering. Another muttered something about company growth and strategic restructuring. But Keanu's silence cut through the excuses. Words were meaningless against reality. Their actions had consequences whether they admitted it or not. Keanu's calm authority revealed more than the secret plans themselves. It revealed the true character of everyone in that room. Those who had plotted in shadows showed fear, guilt, and desperation. Those who had remained honest and diligent, quietly doing their work, were still dignified despite the chaos around them. This was a test of integrity, and the results were painfully clear. As the minutes stretched, tension filled the air. The executives realized that this wasn't just about disrespect anymore. It wasn't about a man being ignored in the lobby or judged by appearances. This was about the very future of the company, the livelihoods of hundreds of employees, and the moral compass of the people in charge. Keanu's eyes swept across the room slowly, deliberately. Each glance carried weight. Each pause communicated understanding and judgment. The silent authority he radiated demanded reflection. Everyone in the room understood that their arrogance, their scheming, and their indifference had been laid bare. For the first time that morning, fear replaced arrogance. Respect replaced casual dismissal. And the realization hit everyone simultaneously. They had underestimated a man not by his skills, not by his wealth, but by his character. They had assumed that appearances and titles defined value. They were wrong. Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm but powerful, resonating through the room. "I didn't come here for recognition," he said. "I came to see how you treat people you think don't matter. And I have seen everything I needed to see." The words hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. The room was utterly still. The employees and executives understood that they were facing consequences far beyond the momentary embarrassment. The truth had been revealed, and truth, when ignored, demanded accountability. Lightbulb secret deals, hidden transfers, and arrogance exposed. Sometimes reality is the only measure of character. This was not yet the end. It was the point where the stakes became clear, where the executives realized that status, appearances, and hidden schemes mean nothing in the presence of real power and real character. And as Keanu's calm gaze swept across the room, they understood that their decisions, their integrity, and their respect, or lack of it, would shape the next few moments in ways none of them could escape. The boardroom was still. The air thick with tension. Every executive and employee in that room knew they were in the presence of a man who could alter their lives with a single decision. And Keanu Reeves didn't need to shout or demand attention. The calm in his eyes, the measured way he stood, and the quiet authority he radiated filled the room with an almost tangible weight. Keanu looked slowly around the table, taking in every face. He saw fear where there had once been arrogance. He saw uncertainty where there had been overconfidence. He saw the consequences of years of casual disrespect, hidden schemes, and careless judgment laid bare in real time. This was the moment where true character, or the lack of it, revealed itself. "I didn't come here to be recognized," Keanu began, his voice steady, controlled, yet carrying an unshakable authority. "I came to see how you treat people you think don't matter." The words hung in the air. Every person in the room felt them settle like a weight upon their shoulders. There was no anger, no dramatics, no theatrics, just truth. And truth is always heavier than pretense. He paused, letting the silence stretch. The executives shifted uncomfortably. Some cleared their throats. Others avoided eye contact. Every nervous movement emphasized the stark contrast between their arrogance and his calm control. "You've been tested," he continued. "And in every way that matters, you've failed." No one spoke. No one argued. Words would have been futile. They understood now that their judgment, their schemes, and their casual disregard had consequences far beyond what they had imagined. Keanu reached into his pocket again, not for a card this time, but for a subtle gesture of authority, a signal to security that the moment of reckoning had arrived. The silent command was enough. "Effective immediately," he said, his voice firm and unyielding. "You're all terminated." The words landed like a thunderclap. Time seemed to slow. Executives' eyes widened, mouths parted, and the room seemed to tilt under the sudden shift in power. In seconds, the hierarchy they had relied on crumbled. Status meant nothing. Titles meant nothing. Wealth meant nothing. Respect, or the lack of it, was the only currency that mattered in this moment. Security personnel entered quietly but efficiently. No shouting. No drama. Just precision. The room's energy shifted instantly. The executives who had laughed and planned in the comfort of assumed immunity now found themselves powerless. Confidence and arrogance were stripped away in an instant. Some tried to speak, to explain, to negotiate, but Keanu's calm presence made it clear. Excuses would not save them. Actions have consequences, and this was the consequence of disrespect, deceit, and arrogance. Yet even in this moment of judgment, Keanu's approach was not purely punitive. It was instructive. Each person was being shown the cost of assumptions, the fragility of power, and the importance of humility. This was a lesson in real authority, the kind earned through respect and character, not inherited titles or superficial appearances. As the room settled under the weight of realization, a subtle tension remained. Employees and executives alike were caught between fear and comprehension, their internal worlds shaken. They now understood that for years they had measured power incorrectly, had judged value by appearances, and had assumed the weak were insignificant. That assumption had nearly cost them everything. Keanu finally allowed a long pause. The silence gave space for reflection. Every glance he cast was measured, deliberate. No words were wasted. Every presence in the room felt his observation, understanding that he had seen through arrogance, deception, and pretense alike. And then, as if to remind everyone of the ultimate truth, Keanu spoke again, softer this time. Power is meaningless without respect. Titles are hollow without character. Wealth counts for nothing if it blinds you to the value of others. The room absorbed every word. Every action leading up to this moment, the laughter, the hidden deals, the dismissive glances, was laid bare in the quiet aftermath of truth. The executives realized they had been playing a dangerous game, not just with the company but with human decency itself. The message was clear. Arrogance always exposes itself, and real authority is measured by how you treat those you believe have no power. In this room, for these people, that lesson had just been delivered with unmistakable clarity. Lightbulb power, respect, and character, they are not granted. They are revealed. And when arrogance meets truth, only humility survives. The boardroom was quiet now, but not in the tense, suffocating way it had been minutes ago. That fear had settled, replaced by something heavier, deeper, more reflective. Every executive and employee who had been part of the arrogance and schemes now understood that the world they thought they controlled was far more fragile than they imagined. Keanu Reeves stood among them, calm as ever, a silent anchor in a sea of uncertainty. His leather jacket, once dismissed as worn and ordinary, now seemed almost symbolic. A reminder that appearances deceive and character is revealed in action, not style. His eyes swept across the room, observing, weighing, and understanding every reaction. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The employees who had entered late, unaware of the tension, now realized that they had witnessed something extraordinary. A quiet, unassuming man holding absolute power, and using it not to boast but to reveal truth. Finally, Keanu spoke. His voice was steady, measured, and authoritative, yet not cruel. "Your jobs are safe," he said. Relief rippled through the room like a tide washing over rocks. Shoulders relaxed. Tense expressions softened. People exhaled, realizing that while their arrogance had been exposed, their livelihoods were not destroyed. This act of grace was deliberate. Keanu had shown the executives and employees the cost of arrogance and deceit, but he was not without mercy. Respect, after all, was not about punishment, it was about recognition, humility, and understanding. He paused, letting his words sink in. "This company will never judge people by clothes or titles," he continued, "because real character is shown in how you treat people you believe have no power." The executives, many of whom had been plotting in secret, now faced an unshakable truth. They had been blind to the very foundation of authority. They had assumed that appearances and confidence equaled value. They had judged others, ignored others, and dismissed others. And now they had learned the hard way that arrogance always reveals itself. Some employees, younger or newer, looked around, awe and relief mingling on their faces. They had witnessed a masterclass in both authority and humanity. It wasn't the leather jacket or the old sneakers that commanded respect. It was the clarity, patience, and unwavering principles of the man standing before them. Keanu moved slowly through the room, making eye contact with each person. Not one glance was wasted. Every individual felt seen, not for their mistakes, not for their fears, but for the potential to act differently in the future. His presence communicated a lesson far beyond corporate hierarchies. True leadership is earned through integrity, respect, and moral courage, not titles or status. He stopped at the center of the room, letting the silence stretch again. The executives shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding eye contact, others fidgeting with documents or watches, aware that the arrogance that had carried them for years had evaporated in the presence of truth. Keanu's voice softened slightly, more reflective than commanding. "You weren't ignoring me because I was weak," he said. "You were ignoring me because you were arrogant. And arrogance is never hidden for long, it always shows itself. The world has a way of revealing truth whether we like it or not." For a few seconds no one moved. No one spoke. Then, slowly, a sense of understanding began to replace fear. The executives and employees realized that respect was not optional. Integrity was not a suggestion. Humility was not weakness. These lessons were not theoretical. They were tangible, experienced, and unforgettable. Some nodded slightly, quietly acknowledging the truth they had ignored. Others, older and more seasoned, seemed to absorb it like a revelation, a reminder of the fragility of pride and the power of moral courage. Even those who had been most defiant now understood that the man in front of them wasn't simply powerful. He was just. He was measured. And he was patient enough to allow them to witness the consequences of their choices. Keanu stepped back, letting the moment settle. "This company will thrive because respect will no longer be conditional," he said. "Because from this day forward, no one will be judged by what they wear, the office they occupy, or the power they think they wield. Respect must be earned through actions and integrity, not appearances." A few employees dared a tentative smile. Relief mingled with a newfound understanding. The executives remained serious, the lesson weighing heavily on them, but they also realized that grace had been offered alongside judgment. The opportunity to correct their behavior had been presented, and the future of the company, once threatened by arrogance and hidden schemes, was now secure. And as Keanu finally left the room, calm and quiet as he had entered, one undeniable truth lingered. The man in the worn leather jacket and old sneakers had revealed more than ownership and authority. He had revealed the essence of character, the importance of humility, and the irreversible cost of arrogance. Lightbulb respect is not about who has power, wealth, or status. Respect is about humanity, integrity, and how you treat those you assume are powerless. The employees would carry this lesson with them for the rest of their lives. Some would act differently immediately. Some would take years to understand it fully. But one thing was certain. Keanu Reeves had not been ignored because he was weak. He had been ignored because others were arrogant, and arrogance always reveals itself in the end. The story ended, but the lesson remained. In the presence of true character, appearances are meaningless, and respect is the ultimate measure of humanity. Speech balloon. Do you think Keanu made the right decision? Thumbs up like if respect should be unconditional. Repeat button. Share this with someone who needs this reminder.